Hi everyone, my name is Simon. Welcome to a new rendering teardown. Today we'll be dealing with a interesting rendering with mainly some talk about composition. So yeah, let's get started. So as you can see, the rendering is in itself pretty interesting. In terms of composition, there are some interesting stuff happening, but we'll see. There are some things that I think needs to be a little bit more refined. So I think mainly one thing that I think could be changed is basically this sort of framing is a little bit problematic according to me. So I'm not really a huge fan of the foliage here, but we'll see. It's just in terms of composition. I think what we have here is quite interesting. We have this is not the main building, I think, because stuff are happening here, but still, in terms of focus, I think we have something happening here. And the problem we have is that in between these two objects here and us here, we have quite a lot of different lines happening, and this is a little bit hard to read the image efficiently. So I think this comes down to a problem of composition and a problem in tiny details. So the problem of composition, I'd suggest having something a little bit bigger here would be interesting. And the reason why is quite simple is that because I think the foliage here is making the image a little bit too crammed here. So I would suggest, having a composition a little bit bigger in terms of sky space is making the image breathe a little bit more, and getting rid of the trees here is, I think, also something that is interesting and quite and sort of make the image a little bit more legible, I'd say. So if we copy that, yeah, not really good. Do that as well. Put it here. Do something like this. Yeah, this is looking weird, but still, this will do. Just to get the idea. So there you go. So there you go. I think this looks a little bit more like, because the thing is, especially when you're working with some sort of public space, you have to sort of give the impression of space, and this can seem a little bit counterintuitive, but this is by actually opening your image on the sky and the height, I'd say, that you can actually make the space look bigger than it actually is. Because if you have like a tree hiding most of the blank space of the image, you're actually sort of making it feel a little bit too small. So I think it's better this way. As you can see, looks a little bit like wider. Second thing is going to be regarding really tiny details, but as I said earlier, just something like you have your main point of interest here and you're sort of centering the composition on it. So you have to have your sort of a composition line sort of leading towards this object. The thing is, it's sort of happening with the tiles on the ground here, so that's okay. The thing is, there are some slight variation, and they are quite there are many of them, like this is going this way, this is going this way, this is not even properly aligned to this. So I know it's more a problem of design than the actual image, but still try to like at least make this guy a little bit more in the same axis than the rest of the floor. And maybe by making this sort of, as you can see here, there's something that is a little bit weird, is that this is some sort of a grate or something like that here. And the thing is, it's getting smaller the more it's, the closer it gets to us, which should be the opposite of what is actually happening. So you want it to get smaller the further it gets. So that's, and the thing is, this sort of texture is quite heavy in terms of yeah, weight in the image. So you want it to be a little bit like faded. The other thing that is a little bit eye-catching in the image is the fact that we have at least I guess two different light source in the image, because as you can see here, basically when we take into account the, like say this bench here, you can see the sun is coming this way. So from here, whereas this guy here has the sun coming this way, same for this guy, same for this guy, same for this girl. And so yeah, there's something a little bit weird happening. And the thing is, it's especially problematic when you have like all the shadows of the dudes going this way, but this facade here is in the sunshine, whereas this one is not. Well, anyway, you get the idea. So just double check that. Second thing as well is to be really careful to match the shadows between people and the objects. As you can see here, they're extremely sharp and sort of a solid, whereas here on this guy, they're extremely faded and, well, they're not going in the right direction, but that's another problem. So just be careful with this sort of thing. The other thing I think as well is that they might be a little bit not too many people, but I'm not sure they're placed the right way. I'm not really convinced by this guy. So I don't know. And the other thing is as well, something that you have to be really careful with is for people especially for people you place in the foreground, to really check the way the light comes to their face. As you can see here, this guy has a highlight on the right side, so that means he's actually lit properly for the model, but his actual cast shadow is not going the right way. So basically this should be going this way. So you can sort of get away with it in background for the people, but you have to be a little bit more careful in the foreground, because otherwise it's a little bit more obvious. Here I completely hid it's like really poor work I did there, but there were like quite many birds here, so I don't have anything against birds, but still I think you have to be really careful when using it. What I usually do in some of my renders, which is I find quite fun and a little bit more, not subtle, but a little bit more fun, is to, instead of having them flying, is just to have like a couple of them sort of eating bread or whatever. So what I would do here is, and you can actually use this kind of thing in the foreground without having to put like someone, and it's still a little bit more subtle. It's quite fun. What you can do if you still want to keep these guys is to double check the scaling, because oftentimes they are huge. They're like some sort of dragons flying around. Here they seem okay, but still. And what I would do still is to get rid of some of them, because there are quite many of them, and it sort of catches the eye. Thing is, if we're going back to the sort of thing I was suggesting, you still have some more room, but still be careful not to overdo it. Another thing that could be interesting still, if you really have, in terms of design, your tree here, is to not really necessarily put it in the foreground, but actually use it as like make the shadow visible So that could be some sort of a first interesting foreground. So something you can have a look at. Another thing I want to talk about quickly is the colors. There's something a little bit like, this is a way of doing it, like if everything is sort of bluish, but I think it's a little bit unnatural. So here I've added a hue saturation adjustment layer and just adjusting stuff like really accurately, but like it's not much of a change, but still you can see it does look a little bit more natural. And also there's a question of contrast. As you can see, if we switch these on, these guys, you can see it's a little bit flat. So what you can do is just play a little bit around with the levels, add a little bit of contrast, and just be careful in your alpha layer to sort of decrease the contrast the further you get, because you cannot really get, like, what is interesting with the contrast is to sort of focus on basically the ground and this part here. This should be a little bit faded out, because otherwise it's you're not gonna really read the depth in the image, which what is contrast for in the first place. I think that's pretty much it. As you can see, there are some changes, but it's, well, I won't say it's subtle, because it's definitely not the same thing, but I think the base was really, really nice. And there are the details that are quite working, like all the vegetation here is done well, so, and the texturing as well is good. So beside the overall composition and some tiny details in terms of lighting, the overall image is really nice. So yep, I think I'll just end there. Hopefully you've learned some interesting stuff, and I'll see you in the next Teardown. Thank you, guys.
Hey, Dylan.